Welcome to Notes from Underground. I'm Jareth Copus. We're going to be continuing our conversation about the color revolution going on in Belarus. We're also going to delve deeper into the roots of this. But I want to start with our questions from last week. Have you decided yet how you think this should end? Do you prefer the blood of innocents being spilled in the streets just so a different dictator can come in and take the place of Lukashenko and open the country for pillage and plunder for elites? Kind of similar to how Ukraine did with Joe Biden as viceroy when his son Hunter was able to come in and make millions for doing nothing. But I guess a nearly 7-year civil war, thousands of innocents killed on both sides, and millions of people misplaced is worth it for Mr. Biden. But don't take this as an endorsement for Trump either. I hope that you also took time to think about our last question. Have you decided, are you okay sitting back while journalists like Vladislav Davidson and organizations like the Atlantic Council push for this so-called revolution to become less velvet and more militaristic like Maidan? Or are you against senseless war in the name of profit for the few and death for the many? Vladislav did reach out to me on Twitter after our previous show with this cowardly response, and then chose to no longer respond. Clearly his journalistic integrity has either been lost or was never there to begin with, refusing to take any responsibility for his words and just blows them up. I never gave him any credence as a journalist or as someone who was in the position to make these types of commands, but the fact that he thinks his work could not possibly push someone to perform the same evil that happened in Maidan, then he's either a complete fool or a willing participant in this coup as a propagandist for the West. Perhaps if he had to partake in the fighting that could ensue instead of sitting comfortably behind his computer in Venice, then he would change his mind. We're going to be taking a closer look at something you don't really hear much about. Surely if you're following this story out of Belarus, you know, well, at least the image of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the dark-haired young woman who challenged Lukashenko in the elections. But what else do we know about her? Well, she's 37 years old, and to call her a political outsider would even be giving her too much credence. She's now a former English teacher, but most importantly, she's the wife of a controversial YouTube contributor, nightclub owner, and concert organizer, Jareth Tikhanovskaya, who is also touted as a pro-democracy activist, and whom I believe was picked by the West as Belarus's Juan Guaido. So in Jareth's YouTube show, he based it around interviewing his Belarusian subscribers and showing the plight of the everyday person in Belarus, giving his slant of how it would be much better with more democracy, which to him appears to mean turning into America overnight. But not the America we know, but the America our foreign policy enforcing ambassadors push on the people of these countries, giving the illusion to the youth that every child in America lives like a celebrity, and makes the adults believe that everyone has a huge home full of high-quality consumer goods and a great job that they love, when in reality we are a country of division, cowardice, and depression. All of these seeds sown by our own techno-fascist overlords in D.C. As time progressed, it was clear that Jareth had either received grooming from the West or had studied the color revolution tactics to a T from other countries. Along with his recent arrest, he also created slogans such as "Stomp the Cockroach," which was utilized in both Serbia as well as Ukraine. He did such a good job that Euronews even labeled his actions as the Slippers Revolution, a reference presumably to the slippers being used to stomp a cockroach. On May 7th, he stated he would be running for president. 2 days later, he and some of his group staged what they called an anti-parade, in opposition to allowing those who had come together to celebrate the Victory Day parade commemorating the defeat of the Nazis in World War II. Kind of a strange thing to protest, but it was done so under the guise that it was because the people in the parade were not being responsible in regards to the coronavirus pandemic. Amongst the 15 people who were arrested was Jareth himself, who was then glorified as a wrongly imprisoned victim, with the media campaign being started by none other than the U.S. government-owned, tool of the CIA, and proven to have been staffed by former Nazis, like you can really be a former Nazi, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Tikhanovsky was released later the same month and became a media darling in the West even further, and was compared to the likes of Navalny. Despite his previous attempt to ridicule the people who had gathered to celebrate the Victory Day parade, Sergei organized yet another protest, and on May 29th, after an altercation with a woman who was questioning his double standards of, on one hand, being against the Victory Day parade, while on the other, holding his own gatherings despite the coronavirus. Video shows the two verbally fighting and a scuffle ensuing between him and the woman. When police arrive, Tikhanovsky resists arrest and is arrested along with the other members of his entourage. Days after his arrest, Belarusian officials claims to have found $900,000 in Tikhanovsky's second house. This accusation is yet to be proven, but what is more telling is that a man who has made his life out of criticizing how his country's run, claiming it's a poor country full of struggling people, has not one, but two homes. Not only had he been arrested, but he was now unable to run for president, which destroyed his viability as an opposition candidate that the West could use. It would take a far greater effort to claim he was president when he couldn't even be voted for. It was clear that this was now passed down to his wife, Svetlana, who would willingly pick up the torch in her husband's stead. Not only that, but she could utilize his arrest better than anyone else. Now that you have a clear view of the precursor to the actual disputed elections and the groundwork laid by the West, we will be ending this episode with a simple question. Thus far, is there grounds for a case of election interference? And always remember, we must bring war to the war makers. I'm Jareth Copus. This is Notes from Underground.